Alright, so today I want to cover a topic that most other YouTubers probably won't cover, and that is when your animals get sick, and in the worst case, they actually pass away. And sometimes you can lose them on a large scale. You can lose a lot of animals. And let me tell you, if you're dealing with animals, there's always a risk that something can happen to that animal. And that's kind of what I want to cover today. I've been pretty much keeping animals, keeping and breeding them for pretty much my whole life, as long as I can remember. I've been through quite a few different animals, and now I have a lot of different animals that I keep, probably hundreds, maybe even thousands if you count up all my rats and all the little litters of rats and mice and everything. I have an incredible amount of animals I have to take care of. And sometimes sickness can sweep through your animals and totally wipe you out. And I know a lot of people have been watching my channel and they're like, oh yeah, I want to breed these two snakes together and we can make a lot of money, right? That's one of the driving factors behind breeding some of these awesome morphs of ball pythons. We have to keep in mind, the more animals you have, the more you are potentially risking everything. I've come close to losing a lot of money on a lot of different projects, and I kind of want to cover in this video some of my experiences where I lost some animals. As a matter of fact, I had one snake that just out of the blue just fell over dead, which is kind of interesting because it seems like it happens pretty much across the board. As a matter of fact, I had a good friend of mine, a colleague, and just last year, he was the same age as I am, just went to sleep in his lounge chair and didn't wake up. And let me tell you, it's shocking when it happens to people, but if you have a lot of animals that you're directly responsible for, it happens more than you know. I've had some chickens just kind of fall over. I'm thinking it's just like something going on with, you know, their heart or something like that. You really don't know what is going on with these animals. Sometimes there's just absolutely no warning, and they just pass away, which is, it seems like the bigger you get and the more animals you have, you pretty much, it's surprising at first, but after a while you come to expect it. It's just part of nature. It's not like a car. When the engine goes out, you can just swap out the engine. You know, let me tell you, if something happens to your ticker, it's pretty much the end of the game. There's no recovery from that. And a lot of people that don't keep a lot of animals, I think it's really tough because they're always second guessing themselves. It's like they're always thinking, well, what did I do wrong? Is it something I did? And there is that to some degree, but I'd say in a lot of cases it's nothing you did wrong. And I found pretty much over the many years that I've been keeping animals, it comes down to timing on a lot of these sicknesses. As a matter of fact, I had a Jersey milk cow, if you look back at some of my videos, just had a baby calf, and it was looking a little bit sick, wasn't eating, getting really skinny. Come to find out it had milk fever, and I thought, all right, I'm just gonna keep an eye on this cow to see what happens. Come to find out I had passed the window of pretty much of recovery. It seems like a lot of sicknesses, they get sicker and sicker, and then they reach that transition where there is no recovery and they're gonna die. And that is always the tricky part when you're dealing with animals, because in the case of my milk cow, she got it was like 2 days after she started showing symptoms of actually getting sick, and on the third day she died. And I was thinking, if I would have caught it, you know, hindsight's always 20/20. You're always like, man, if I would have caught it in the first few hours and called the vet and came over here, we could have actually prevented that from happening. I'd say regret is one of the toughest things when you're dealing with animals, because you're like, oh, I should have done this. And then on the flip side, I had another cow that had a baby, and it was sick, kind of sickly looking, and I kept bringing it to the vet over and over and over, and the vet's like, you don't have to bring this calf in here, it's a little overkill. So you want to work with your vet, but you always want to have this balance between, you know, doing too much or not doing enough. And sometimes you really don't know. It's a judgment call, and sometimes the window is really it's a really narrow window that you can have to take action to actually save that animal. And on the flip side, I would say the other thing that is really devastating is if you have something going through and there's nothing that you can do to control it. I had something going through my rodent colony at one point, and I have like hundreds of rats in my rat colony here. and I couldn't figure out what it was, and I was actually throwing out dead rats every single day, day after day. It was completely devastating. Come to find out, it was the incorrect kind of bedding. The bedding was toxic to the rats, and sometimes you can have something like the food or the bedding or something like that that's toxic. As a matter of fact, I actually had an incident just recently where we were spraying ant killer on the deck trying to kill the ants out there, and the windows were open and the cloud of ant killer came into the house and killed our frogs and our crickets and a bunch of stuff. Let me tell you, you can have a lot of stuff that just kind of comes up out of nowhere. It's like, why did my frogs die? So I can't figure it out. And then you start, you start thinking about it. And then, especially with my frogs, I actually saved one frog, my really big Pac-Man, which was fortunate because he was upstairs in my bedroom away from what was going on. But we actually sprayed some ant killer on the porch, and I was standing next to the frog tank and I could kind of smell it. And then after it died, I was thinking, I could smell that ant killer next to my frogs. And sure enough, I went to the pet store and they said, yep, if you can smell ant killer and you're standing next to your frog, I can guarantee that is what is going to kill your frog. So sometimes it is a hard lesson to learn, and sometimes, the more you do it and the more you lose, I would say the more you learn. And I would say, especially if you get into something and you start losing a lot of animals, it's really tough to get back into it and recover, especially if you're breeding rats or something like that and you're losing a lot all the time. And I almost lost a whole herd of cows, which would have been completely devastating. As a matter of fact, it was 2 years ago. I was running a calf down on someone else's, two calves down on someone else's pasture. And I was running with all their other animals, their goats and everything else, and I got this calf back and it had diarrhea really super bad. And I thought, all right, well, sometimes they get diarrhea from running on the fresh pasture grass because it's really rich in protein, and sometimes it can give them the runs, and sometimes it's pretty much normal. I didn't really think much of it. And then within a week, all my cows started getting diarrhea, and it was bloody diarrhea. And let me tell you, bloody diarrhea is severely, it can kill something really quick. So I was pretty fast acting. I started treating with oxytetracycline. And the funny thing is when I was treating my herd with oxytetracycline, come to find out the goats that were running with my calves also had it. We don't know where it came from, maybe a wild animal or something. And those goats, as a matter of fact, the goat farmer treated those goats with a different medication. And I didn't even know the goats were sick, and I called him up about a month later and I was like, hey, how's your goats doing? And he's like, well, almost all of them died from that sickness. And it was really scary to me because not only you have to take the right action, but you have to take the right action at the right time. So it's the timing and the right treatment and to save your animals. Sometimes it's pretty scary, especially on a large scale. And I was thinking, I really only risked 12 cows, which is, $15,000. That is a huge amount of money in cows. But just think if I had thousands of cows and something like that, kind of went through the herd and I risked everything. It's kind of what you're facing, especially if you invest a lot in ball pythons. And a lot of times you think, snakes really don't get sick. They're pretty bulletproof. I mean, they can go with months, even a year without eating. And it's almost like nothing, you almost can think of nothing can kill a snake because it's just so resilient. But I've actually seen some YouTube videos where a sickness has run through people's reptile collection and killed almost every single snake. And I've seen people get so discouraged that they completely get out of it. And it's kind of unfortunate because when you're dealing with animals, it's almost inevitable that eventually you will hit that at one point or another. I was actually just watching a channel the other day, just starting out, bought a few snakes, bought some rats, and the rats got so sick they had to be euthanized. And let me tell you, if you're just starting out and you're not used to animals on a large scale and you're not used to losing animals, it can be really defeating, I would say, if you're working with animals. And Another thing you have to think of is a lot of animals have a limited lifespan. So for example, my mice only live about 12 months. It's pretty amazing. When I first started getting into breeding rodents, it was an eye-opener as far as you're working with something that reproduces really fast and has a really short lifespan. As a matter of fact, I was kind of holding back. I started breeding fancy mice and I was holding back all these fancy mice. I was like, oh yeah, this one's so pretty. I just want to keep it and keep it for a while. And the problem is 12 months later, all the ones that I was holding back started dying of old age. It's a little bit, I don't know what Bobby's doing here all over my head, but it's weird dealing with rodents that have a really short lifespan. As a matter of fact, a lot of my rats only live about 3 years, and I have a lot of almost like pet retired breeders, and if I don't actually feed those off before the end of their life, I got to the point where I was keeping all these old retired rats and I was throwing out dead rats like every week because they're all dying from old age. It's an interesting dynamic between life and death and the sickness and the lifespan of animals, and unless you're into it on a large scale, you don't even really notice it. A lot of people think they're gonna live forever and it's always a good thought that you're gonna live forever, but everything that is living on the planet has a finite lifespan. And I always like to think of my animals like, even if I'm going to use these as feeders, or if I'm going to use my cows as beef or something like that, as long as they're living, as long as they're under my care, I treat them as good as pets. They are like pets up until the time where we need to use them for another purpose. And I'd say it's a different mentality than most people have. The mentality of like the farmer that farms animals for food versus the people that are used to just pets in the pet store, and I'd say it's a difficult transition for most people to kind of wrap their head around them. And that's why I tell a lot of people, if you're getting into rats to feed your snakes, rats or mice, a lot of times you will actually get attached to the animals and it's really difficult. I'd say, as a matter of fact, in most cases I would recommend doing a frozen thawed if you can, and kind of just get away from that, especially if you have kids, because your kids can get really attached to the animals. And that, I would say, is probably one of the big things when it comes to farmers on a large scale. A lot of people get attached to their cows or stuff like that. So the good thing about ball pythons is they have a long life of about 30 years. So this snake right here on my neck, this is Bobby, my bamboo ball python, and he's gonna probably outlive me. he's still pretty young. He's got about maybe another 30 years ahead of me. I'll be old and gray by the time this snake is old, which is pretty awesome. Hopefully nothing will ever happen to him. He's an awesome snake. And another thing, speaking of things that are really kind of dark and heavy, I'm kind of going through a transition here on my YouTube channel, and I've pretty much made a decision that I'm going to resign from my day job. I haven't really told my boss yet. We've been kind of talking back and forth about it. I haven't told my family either, but I'm pretty much making about 50% of what I need to live at this point, mostly through the YouTube ads. And I'm making a little bit from Patreon supporters, so if you want to support me on Patreon, I have a link under the description and a link at the end. I've been putting everyone's name at the end of every video with my Patreon supporters, which is pretty awesome. I think I'm up to like $100 a month. It's not enough to live on, but Bobby's choking me out again. All right, Bobby, here we go. Bobby just went through his shed, so he's kind of feeling a little spry. So anyway, I'm really kind of, it's almost like walking up to the cliff and getting ready to jump off, going full-time as a snake breeder and a YouTuber. And essentially what I have as far as my diverse income stream is, it's primarily my YouTube ads, a little bit from Patreon, that my Patreon supporters, a little bit from Amazon Associates. If you click on one of my links under my videos, those are associate links, and then if you go over and buy something on Amazon, I actually get a commission from that, which is pretty cool. I actually started up my Teespring, selling some merch, sold a couple things, made a little bit of money, not a whole lot on that. But I'm hoping to kind of roll all these things together and make ends meet. I figure my YouTube revenue will be almost at 100% of what I'm making now in my day job in another year. So I figure I have another year between now and the time where I'm basically where I'm at right here financially. And I figure in the meantime, I have a lot of holdbacks, I have a lot of triple heads, I have a lot of stuff that I could sell if I got in a bind and I needed to free up some cash, because snakes are always worth money. So that is pretty much it. Thanks for watching, and I will see you next time.